Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is really digging into the essential draw of a pretty remarkably detailed campaign. It's created by Gregory, a GM with nearly 45 years of experience. The campaign is Fort Aegis versus Shadowgate Canyon. So we're analyzing the primary source of player excitement here, trying to define the campaign's, let's say, core identity. Is the magnetic appeal the classic, deep, gauntlet-style mega dungeon crawl, focused squarely on intense tactical combat? Or is the real excitement generated by the complex and frankly rarely mastered systems for wilderness hex exploration and the very robust settlement and downtime rules? Now, I'm going to argue pretty unequivocally that the primary draw is the demanding, combat-focused mega dungeon experience.
And I come at it from, well, a different angle. While the dungeon is undeniably a centerpiece, it's a true spectacle of complexity, no doubt. I believe the unique selling point, what truly differentiates this particular offering from, 1,000 other high-level crawls, is Gregory's masterful utilization of those sophisticated exploration and settlement mechanics. The ability for players to engage with a complete, detailed world outside of just combat is, I think, for many players, actually the more exciting and enduring promise here.
Okay, I see why you might think that, but let me give you maybe a different perspective, one that's really grounded in Gregory's history and the campaign's structural gravity. The campaign description itself is, I think, a testament to its combat focus. It defines a structure as an endless descent into the Underdark, right into the labyrinths of doom. It is explicitly labeled a gauntlet-style mega dungeon crawl, designed for levels 1 right through 21. And when we look at Gregory's career, starting AD&D way back in 1979, that massive 4,700-hour longest campaign, it's just steeped in a tradition of high-volume, often punishing, tactical combat. You can see this DNA in stories like the notorious 99 goblinoids in a single initiative dungeon. Apparently, that demanded like 9 hours of focused tactical engagement. So the core design principles seem to be maximizing difficulty and mechanical mastery. The goals are pretty clear: surviving escalating difficulty, where the creature challenge ratings, the CRs, often vary between the party's average party level, APL, -1, all the way up to APL +4. That type progression, it signals a real dedication to consistent high-stakes encounters. This is combat-heavy, dungeon crawl, and tactical crunchy play, using strict Pathfinder 1E RAW rules as written. The Mega Dungeon, I argue, is the engine, it's the purpose, and it's the final destination of this entire adventure.
That's a compelling argument, certainly, but I would frame the definition of crunchy a bit differently. I absolutely agree Gregory has mastered running complex combat rules. Nobody's debating that. But the sophistication here isn't just about tactical fighting. It's the depth of the environment in which that fighting is contextualized. While the Dark Maw mega dungeon structure is obviously present, the complexity and, importantly, the potential for meaningful player agency lie in those robust supporting systems. Those are what elevate this offering beyond just a standard hack and slash into something more like a hybrid experience. The description, as you noted, explicitly promises wilderness hex exploration and side quests between the dungeons and the Frontierhold settlement. But even more importantly, the campaign offers 5 distinct game styles. And Style 5? That's the clearest evidence, I think, of Gregory's true capacity and perhaps intent regarding these non-combat systems. Style 5 focuses almost entirely on the sandbox elements: settlement building, downtime, NPC social conflicts, exploration, mass combat, sieges, and even easing into kingdom building. And crucially, the dungeon becomes almost peripheral in that style, only one adventuring encounter per in-game month. That shows a deep commitment. The sheer effort put into streamlining the settlement and accelerated downtime systems, including providing specific high-stat NPC crafters, we're talking Intelligence 20 here, demonstrates that complex strategic non-combat growth is intended as a core, highly detailed feature, not just some kind of intermission between fights.
My reservation, though, about elevating the settlement to a completely parallel system hinges on its strategic function. Consider the constraint that's imposed by the dungeon itself. The deeper below ground you go, the more difficult and long is the way back home. Now, this escalating logistical constraint, it frames the difficulty of the dungeon as the central dilemma, right? The Metaopolis settlement for downtime, as it's called, and the accelerated downtime system itself, they serve a vital, practical purpose. They are necessary staging areas, they're resource replenishment centers required simply to survive the escalating difficulty of the Abyssal Gauntlet. You brought up the high-end crafting NPCs. Now this isn't just flavor, it's a strategic bypass. It cuts through the typically tedious Pathfinder crafting time sink. Gregory is essentially saying, look, don't waste game time on passive resource acquisition. Optimize your character build efficiently with high-end gear so you can get back to tackling those APL +4 combat challenges. Everything, ultimately, feeds the descent. The downtime is just the necessary refueling period for that high-intensity combat loop.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the settlement is merely a tactical pit stop. If it were just about refueling, why the extreme level of detailed mechanics? Why explicitly incorporate proactive, systemic non-combat challenges like massive social conflicts, gambling, and heists? Refueling sort of implies a passive recovery, doesn't it? These are active, highly detailed subgames that offer alternative paths to wealth, influence, maybe even power. Style 5 fundamentally undermines the idea that the dungeon is the only path to fulfillment in this campaign. If failure in the dungeon can be mitigated or maybe even avoided entirely by engaging successfully in profitable social or settlement play, well, if the settlement can produce better, safer results than risking life and limb constantly underground, then the settlement becomes the primary strategic buffer. And that shifts the player's agency dramatically.
Furthermore, the commitment to high-resolution mapping confirms this, I think. The source material states, and I quote, "Any hex on the city or wilderness map can have its own scaled battle map." Now that indicates that resource gathering or even just moving around the city isn't some abstract chore. It's potentially a substantive tactical game in its own right, mirroring the kind of complexity found inside the dungeon. It really feels like a parallel structure, not just functional support. And let's delve a little deeper into exploration itself. The GM's stated preferences list hex crawl exploration right alongside dungeon crawl and combat heavy. That doesn't feel like relegation to me. It feels like elevation. It's a core game mechanic in his philosophy. More crucially, Gregory details the robust use of pre-combat skill checks, things like perception, stealth, survival, knowledge checks, to determine combat conditions, starting distance, and even detailed story elements. These checks don't just offer flavor. They mechanically determine things like if the party's surprised, how far away enemies start, what environmental benefits or penalties might apply. For instance, a successful survival check might let you predict the weather, maybe avoid a difficult encounter entirely. This shows that the wilderness interaction is functionally crucial. It is a story-generating system that determines the very conditions of your survival long before the party ever engages with a creature token on a map. Mastery of the wilderness provides tangible strategic advantage, making it, potentially, a viable alternative focus to pure combat.
Okay, I acknowledge the explicit inclusion of hex crawl and its role in, generating story and affecting combat setup. That's fair. However, we still have to frame that relative to the campaign's central stated goal, protecting Fort Aegis, the last city, from the creatures dwelling below the Shadow Gate. The exploration, while detailed, feels tactical, driven by that existential need for high-quality resources that are necessary to survive the increasingly brutal dungeon. It reinforces the overall survival and gritty fantasy themes, which are, let's be honest, necessary for the feel of the Abyssal Gauntlet. And when you look at the guidance provided on party composition, the focus is clearly on maximizing effective builds: cleric, rogue, fighter, wizard, bard. Now, that selection heavily favors classes geared toward tackling combat challenges, dealing with traps, handling magical complexity, which are the defining characteristics of a mega-dungeon descent. While social conflict is certainly present, the primary mechanical support, things like optimized class selection and the immediate availability of high-end gear, seems geared toward maximizing tactical efficacy in combat, not primarily towards navigating complex social dynamics or long-term kingdom management, which would likely be the hallmark of a pure hexcrawl or settlement-focused system. The exploration feels, ultimately, like a high-stakes prerequisite for survival in the main event, the dungeon. And this leads us directly to interpreting Gregory's Notorious meticulousness. His defining strengths: prepared, meticulous, experienced. These are deployed, it seems, to run arguably the crunchiest system, Pathfinder 1E, Raw, specifically for intense tactical combat. The entire system appears built around fidelity to rules mastery.
I mean, think about the technical commitment involved. Complete raw for fair play, a strict interpretation of complex rules like stealth and grapple, using specific flowcharts, no less, and the emphasis on fast-paced, turn-based combat with precise resource tracking. Now in Pathfinder 1E, rules like grapple or bull rush, even stealth, they're notorious for bringing the table to a grinding halt sometimes. Gregory using detailed flowcharts isn't just being meticulous. It feels like an operational commitment to ensure that high-complexity combat remains fluid and viable. This strongly suggests his detailed approach is aimed squarely at ensuring the tactical battle experience is the smooth, optimized center of the game, tuned for pace and challenge.
Meticulousness, though, is, I think, equally and profoundly applied to the social and immersive elements. If the whole experience was solely about crunchy combat flowcharts, why would he highlight his training as a stage and film actor? That training allows him, apparently, to voice the entire cast, with unique voices for, well, 222 inhabitants are mentioned, referencing the sheer detail of a massive settlement, like the classic village of Hamlet. That is a phenomenal investment in immersion and social systems that absolutely rivals the combat complexity. We are talking about a commitment to create a living, breathing world where you might return from a difficult, maybe even a grueling 9-hour combat session to a town where hundreds of NPCs potentially have distinct personalities. This dual commitment creates a kind of narrative richness that frankly few campaigns can achieve. Why invest so heavily in being able to run massive social conflicts? Gambling, heists, and duels. All those things detailed explicitly in the Style 5 description, if the primary draw is just killing monsters underground. It suggests the meticulousness serves two deeply integrated ends. Mechanical rigor for combat, yes, but also immersive depth for world interaction. The primary draw could easily be argued to be the depth of interaction offered by that vast settlement sandbox, where strategic social engagement and maybe economic growth are just as detailed and perhaps just as important as tactical combat positioning.
Okay, I appreciate the point about the dual nature of his meticulousness. That's well taken. But my position still remains firm on the structural gravity of it all. The Fort Aegis versus Shadowgate Canyon campaign, by its very title, by its core description, it revolves around the existential conflict of the descent. All the other detailed features, the accelerated downtime, the helpful crafter NPCs, the tactical exploration, even the hundreds of voiced NPCs, they function, I maintain, to serve the long-term, frankly overwhelming goal of surviving 20 levels of continuous, deadly dungeon challenges within a strict tactical environment. It feels like a combat-first campaign that happens to have an extremely detailed infrastructure built around it, designed to elevate and support that high-stakes combat loop. It ensures that players who seek that mechanical mastery find a suitably challenging and, crucially, sustainable environment for it.
And I still maintain that this campaign is a highly sophisticated hybrid design, not just for mechanical survival, but for total immersion. The settlement and exploration systems are so robust, so detailed, offering potentially a complete alternative play cycle, as demonstrated clearly by the possibility of running it as Style 5, that they stand as an equal draw. Gregory utilizes his detailed world building, his acting skills, and his rules mastery to offer what seems like a rare opportunity for deep strategic world interaction alongside high-level tactical crunch. The unique potential of the world outside the dungeon provides, I think, a necessary strategic buffer and a narrative richness that truly defines this campaign, perhaps more than the dungeon itself.
Well, it's certainly clear that Gregory has managed to successfully integrate two play philosophies that are, often mutually exclusive in campaign design. The pure, high-crunch, tactical mega-dungeon and the wide-open, detailed sandbox.
Precisely. And the source material seems to intentionally appeal to two equally deep, yet quite distinct player motivations. It seems designed to offer a rich experience regardless of whether a player's primary motivation is to master the combat or to master the world-building mechanics and the setting. There is certainly, much more to explore in how Gregory actually manages to balance that incredible complexity in play.